Hey, Joel Lewis here, and I wanted to share this quick story with you. I call it the Big Rocks. I'm not sure what's the name of this actual story, but as someone who's an entrepreneur who has a family, three young ones, a wife, uh, this is a story that when I read this for the first time, it hit home for me, and I want to take this story and after I share the story with you, give you the perspective from an entrepreneur dad, a startup dad standpoint, right? Someone who's running a successful multi six figure business and how this story relates to that. So if you're someone in that phase, you're like in that five figure business, or maybe you have six figures or seven figures, and you're struggling with, so the money is fine, right? The revenue is great, but you don't have the freedom, you don't have the control, right, that you want. You don't have the flexibility that you want. You don't have that time with your family like you would want. Then, this is the story. I think you really need to dial in and listen to this story for a second. So the story begins with, there's this professional, right, a time management guru, if you will, and he's standing and presenting in front of a group of students, and not just regular students. They're actually business students, and they're high achievers. So like, these are go-getter students. And he was like, "Hey, we're gonna take a quiz." Right, so they say, "Okay, cool, let's take this quiz," and it's maybe the first class, and he hasn't even given them any material to study from, but again, they're high achievers, and they're ready to take the quiz. So he brings out this 1 gallon. So use your imagination, as because I don't have any props with me. So just imagine what I'm showing you here. So he brings out this 1 gallon size, kind of like mason jar, right? So this big mason jar has a wide opening, right? Sets it on the table in front of him, in front of the whole class. And then he also brings out these fist-sized rocks. Okay, he brings out these fist-sized rocks, and then he slowly, gently places the rocks into the mason jar. Again, it has a wide opening, so he's able to place his hand in there and put the rocks in. And he's able to get, a number of rocks, let's say about 6, 7, 8 rocks into the mason jar. And he, looks up at the class and says, is this jar full? And of course, they're like, everyone raised their hand. Yeah, it's full. And then he says, okay, great. So again, they're high achievers, so right? Everybody wants to get the right answer. So then he reaches under the table and he brings out a bucket full of gravel, right? So gravel, like the smaller rocks, and he starts to dump the gravel into the jar. So he dumps some of the gravel in. He lifts up the mason jar and shakes it a little bit. The gravel kind of falls into more grooves, more open spaces, and then he pours more gravel until the gravel gets to the top of the mason jar. So then he looks up to the class again, and then he says, "Is the glass full now?" And of course, now they're smart, they're high achievers, and they're kind of onto him, and they're like, someone yells out, "No, it's probably not." And then he says, "Good." So then he reaches under the table again, and he brings out a bucket full of sand. And he starts to pour the sand into the mason jar. And, so he pours a little bit of sand, shakes the mason jar, pours more, shakes the and the sand is just finding its way into the jar. And you could kind of imagine like the sand starting at the top, he shakes it, and then the sand is fine. So it starts to, find its way down to the bottom. And you can start to see the sand kind of building up every time he shakes it, pours some more, shakes it, pours some more. And then he looks at the class. He gets the sand all the way to the top. He looks at the class again. He says, "Is the jar full now?" And some wise student yells out, "No, it's probably not full. It's not full." And he says, "Good." So then he reaches under the table again and brings up a glass of water. All right. And he just starts to pour the water into the mason jar. And sure enough, water is going to find its space, right? So he doesn't even have to really shake the mason jar. He just starts to slowly pour, and the water is trickling through. And again, visually, you could kind of see, right? It's a clear glass. So you can kind of see like the water starting from the top, finding its way down. And then as it fills up, you can kind of see the water kind of like rising up in the mason jar. And then he looks up to the class and he says, "What is, so now it's full," right? He's not going to ask them again, "Is it full?" Right? He asks them, what's the reason? Why did I do this quiz. What's the purpose of this? And one of the eager beavers raised their hand and said, you know, regardless of how busy your schedule is, you can always find room to squeeze in more, right? And and I think that's the way a lot of people look at it, right? I think if you're a solopreneur, if you're maybe don't have a family, if you're right out of college, or maybe you could work 25 hours, you can get an extra hour out of there or something like that, right? But with for us who have a family, who want to be present, who want to be available, who want to be engaged, who don't want to sacrifice our family in the pursuit of building the business, because one of the reasons why we're building the business is the family. That logic doesn't work, right? You can't just find more room, right? You're probably already waking up early in the morning before the kids get up. I remember when I was starting my business, I was like, getting up as early as possible to get a couple of hours of work in before the first child came downstairs, and it never fails, right? I wake up at 4 o'clock. Somebody wakes up at 4:15 and is downstairs, like standing in front of my office, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you up at 4:15 in the morning, right? And you're trying to encourage them to go back to bed, or you're up late at night, which means you're not going to bed with your wife or your significant other, right? So that logic doesn't work. The lesson of the story is that if you don't put the most important things in first, there's this quote by and I don't want to butcher the name, but the quote basically goes, the things that matter most should never come at the mercy of the things that matter least, right? So the things that matter most should never come at the mercy of the things that matter least. And the things that matter most, those are the big rocks, right? Because if he reversed it and started with the water, once you've had that, put the water in first, I mean, the glass is full at that point, right? The mason jar would have been full. Like if you try to put anything, even the sand, it would have just overflowed, right? That's when you're trying to get that 25 hours, 26 hours, or you're working ridiculous amount of hours and you end up in the hospital, right? You end up with maybe even simple things, carpal tunnel, because you're working so many hours in the office, or your health, you're out of shape and things start to fall apart because you're putting in the water first, right? Or maybe the sand or the gravel, but you're not putting in the big things first, the rocks, right? So we, as entrepreneurs, business owners who have that family, who want to be present, who want to be at the recitals and the games and the practices, right? Maybe you want to be at practices, not just the games, not only the big events. You want to be at the little moments that matter, so that there's never in a time in their minds, your children's minds, that they could say that you were not there. You want to be able to do date nights with your wife. You want to be able to do activities with your wife and go to bed when she goes to bed or he goes to bed, right? Like, those are the important things, right? So you have to put the rocks in first. And those rocks, like for example, so you may be saying, what are those rocks, right? So for me, one of the big rocks, and I talked about this often, one of the big rocks for me is working out. And when I started to work out, I saw the increase. It was like a hockey puck increase in my business. As I started to get more fit, my business started to get more fit. So like that to me is one of the big rocks. And I get that done early in the morning. That's at 5:30 in the morning. One of the reasons why I do 5:30, I feel like I'm not sacrificing the time with the family and the kids, right? That's my time. It's like, it's my lack of sleep, right? So that's why that's one of the things I put in first. That's one of my big rocks. And that big rock actually gives me more capacity to, when I get to work, I'm more focused, I'm more energized, I could get more stuff done in less time, right? It's crazy how it works, but it's truly how the power of your health and your mental state and your physical fitness, how that actually helps to improve your business, reduces stress at home, less arguments, right? So now you're not having arguments at home, is taking up more time, more energy, which gives you more time, right? More focus. So you have to, for us who have that limited amount of time, and want to be present and not thinking about work when we're at home, or thinking about work while we're trying to go to sleep, right? You're tossing and turning because you're thinking about work when you should be getting that sleep so you could go to the gym in the next morning. um, you have that limited time, and you have to really be aware of like what's those most important things, and you gotta really, like going to the gym. It may not seem, it seems like it's um, you're losing time, right? So it seems like you're losing time, but it's a catch 22. Like you have to go to the gym to gain time, right? So sometimes you may fool yourself to think that one thing is more for you. For maybe a year and a half, I thought that getting up early and working on the business first couple hours in the day was the most important thing, but it wasn't, right? So sometimes you may fool yourself to thinking that something is more important, but I want you to think about, like, what is the one thing? If I did this one thing, it would make everything else less important or irrelevant, or maybe that one thing will help solve a whole bunch of other things, right? And for in this case, and I don't think this is just for me, I think this is for any entrepreneur. It's like working out is going to give you that more capacity to be able to knock out a lot of other things. So that's just one example of the big rocks, right? So I wanted to share that with you. Hopefully that resonates with you. Let me know, comment below, reach out, let me know what you think about this story and the message that I just shared. All right, hope to hear from you soon. Peace.